The rain poured relentlessly, drenching the cold Chicago streets. Huddled in a doorway, Sarah clutched her shivering daughter Emma close, their few possessions stuffed in a tattered backpack. As thunder crashed overhead, Emma whimpered, burying her face in her mother's worn coat. Across the street, Michael hurried from his office, umbrella in hand. His eyes met Sarah's, and he hesitated. In that moment, their lives hung in the balance. Little did they know, this chance encounter would set in motion a series of events that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, family, and the power of second chances. For Sarah and Michael, the storm was just beginning. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Sarah Thompson had never imagined her life would come to this. At 28, she found herself homeless on the streets of Chicago with her 4-year-old daughter Emma. The journey that led her here was marked by pain, betrayal, and desperate choices. Growing up in a small town outside the city, Sarah's childhood had been far from idyllic. Her father, Frank, was a stern and often absent figure, his work as a private investigator keeping him away for long stretches. Her mother, Linda, struggled with depression, leaving Sarah to fend for herself more often than not. At 16, Sarah found solace in the arms of her high school boyfriend. When she became pregnant at 18, her parents' reaction was swift and harsh. Given an ultimatum to give up the baby or leave, Sarah chose the latter, packing a bag and walking away from the only home she'd ever known. For a while she managed. Working multiple jobs, Sarah scraped together enough to rent a tiny apartment. But when Emma was born, the struggles multiplied. The baby's father, unable to cope with the responsibility, abandoned them both. Sarah's world narrowed to a pinpoint-focused survival for herself and her daughter. A series of misfortunes, a lost job, an eviction, a bout of pneumonia that drained her meager savings led to their current situation. For the past 6 months, Sarah and Emma had been living on the streets, in shelters when they could get in doorways when they couldn't. The shame and desperation Sarah felt were overwhelming, but she clung to hope for Emma's sake. Emma, at 4, was a bright spot in Sarah's dark world. Despite their circumstances, the little girl maintained a spark of joy and curiosity that both heartened and pained her mother. Emma's blonde curls and big blue eyes often drew kind looks from passers-by, sometimes resulting in a few dollars pressed into Sarah's hand. But Sarah dreamed of more for her daughter's stability, education, a future brighter than the one she could currently provide. Across the city, in a high-rise apartment with a view of Lake Michigan, Michael Anderson's life couldn't have been more different. At 35, he was a rising star at one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. His corner office on the 30th floor was a testament to his success, as was his luxury car and designer wardrobe. But beneath the polished exterior, Michael was a man haunted by loss. 2 years ago, his wife Claire had been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. Despite the best treatments money could buy, she had slipped away, leaving Michael alone in a world that suddenly seemed empty and meaningless. Since Claire's death, Michael had thrown himself into his work. 60, sometimes 70-hour weeks were the norm. His colleagues praised his dedication, but few recognized it for what it truly was, a desperate attempt to outrun grief. Michael's family and friends had tried to draw him out, to encourage him to date again, but he rebuffed their efforts. The thought of opening his heart again was too painful to contemplate. Instead, he filled his days with work and his nights with restless sleep, haunted by memories of the life he'd lost. Despite his success, or perhaps because of it, Michael felt a growing sense of dissatisfaction. The cases he worked on, defending large corporations against lawsuits, navigating complex mergers and acquisitions, left him feeling hollow. He had entered law with idealistic notions of justice and making a difference, but somewhere along the way, those dreams had been set aside in favor of prestige and financial security. As Michael stared out at the city lights each night, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. He had achieved everything he thought he wanted: professional success, financial stability, respect from his peers, but none of it filled the void left by Claire's passing. Little did Michael know that a chance encounter on a rainy night was about to change everything. The comfortable, if empty, life he had built for himself was about to be turned upside down by a woman and a little girl who had nothing but each other. Sarah and Emma, huddled in that doorway, represented everything Michael had been trying to avoid: emotional entanglement, complications, the messiness of real life. Yet something about their vulnerability would call to a part of him he thought long buried, the part that still believed in the power of compassion and the possibility of redemption. As the paths of these three souls converged, the stage was set for a story of unexpected connections, buried secrets, and the transformative power of love and second chances. Sarah, with her fierce determination and wounded heart; Emma, with her innocent resilience; and Michael, with his carefully constructed walls. Each of them was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves and the world. In the bustling city of Chicago, where millions of stories intersected every day, theirs was about to become one of hope, healing, and the rediscovery of what it means to truly live. The rain showed no signs of letting up as Michael stood across the street, his eyes fixed on the huddled figures in the doorway. Something about the woman's protective stance over her child stirred a long-dormant feeling in his chest. Before he could second-guess himself, he was crossing the street, shoes splashing through puddles. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely audible over the downpour. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" Sarah looked up, her eyes wary. She'd learned the hard way that kindness often came with strings attached, but the man before her, with his concerned expression and smart business suit, didn't seem threatening. "We're fine," she replied automatically, even as Emma shivered against her. Michael frowned, glancing at the little girl. "It's not safe out here in this weather. Look, there's a diner just down the block. Why don't I buy you both a hot meal?" Sarah hesitated, torn between pride and the gnawing hunger she'd been ignoring for days. Emma's small voice made the decision for her. "Mummy, I'm cold," the little girl whispered. With a resigned nod, Sarah gathered their meager belongings and followed Michael to the diner. As they settled into a booth, the warmth of the restaurant seeming almost foreign after so long in the cold, Michael felt a surge of emotions he couldn't quite name. Over steaming plates of food, Sarah cautiously shared snippets of their story. Michael listened, his lawyer's mind cataloging details even as his heart ached for their plight. By the time the plates were cleared, he had made a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. "I have a spare room," he said, the words surprising even himself. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry. You're welcome to stay there while you get back on your feet." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "We couldn't possibly." "Please," Michael interrupted. "I want to help." The ride to Michael's apartment was silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah marveled at the turn of events, hope and suspicion warring within her. Michael questioned his own sanity, wondering what had possessed him to invite strangers into his home. Yet, as he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Emma's sleeping face, a peace he hadn't felt in years settled over him. The next few days were a whirlwind of adjustment. Sarah and Emma settled into the spare room, their few possessions barely making a dent in the spacious area. Michael found himself buying children's cereal and kid-friendly snacks for the first time since, well, ever. It wasn't until he arrived at work on Monday that Michael faced the first real challenge of his impulsive decision. His colleague James cornered him by the coffee machine. "Mike, what's this I hear about you taking in some homeless woman and a kid?" James asked, his voice a mix of concern and judgment. Michael stiffened. "It's temporary. They needed help." James shook his head. "You're playing with fire, man. What if they rob you blind? Or worse, what if she cries rape? You could lose everything." The word stung, but Michael pushed down his doubt. It's not like that. They're good people who've fallen on hard times. As he walked away, Michael could feel the weight of curious stares. By lunchtime, the entire office was buzzing with gossip. He overheard snippets of conversation, words like midlife crisis and savior complex floating around. Meanwhile, Sarah was facing her own challenges. With Emma safely enrolled in a nearby preschool program, thanks to Michael's connections, Sarah began the daunting task of job hunting. Her patchy work history and lack of permanent address made most employers dismiss her outright. It was by sheer chance that she stumbled upon a help-wanted sign in the window of a small cafe. The owner, a kind-faced woman named Rosa, took one look at Sarah's desperate expression and decided to give her a chance. "Everyone deserves an opportunity to turn their life around," Rosa said as she handed Sarah an apron. "Don't make me regret this." As Sarah learned the ropes of being a barista, she felt a glimmer of hope. Each day, as she served customers and memorized drink orders, she felt more like her old self, the person she was before life had beaten her down. One particularly busy afternoon, as Sarah was juggling multiple orders, she looked up to see a familiar face entering the cafe. Her heart nearly stopped as she recognized the woman. It was her mother, Linda. Linda's eyes widened in shock as she took in the sight of her daughter behind the counter. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, Linda turned and hurried out of the cafe. Sarah's hands shook as she finished making the drinks, her mind reeling. After 4 years of no contact, the sudden appearance of her mother brought a flood of conflicting emotions. Anger at being abandoned, longing for the relationship they once had, fear of rejection, all swirled together in a dizzying mix. That evening, as Sarah recounted the encounter to Michael over dinner, she felt a strange sense of relief at finally sharing her past with someone. Michael listened intently, his legal mind already formulating questions about Sarah's family history. "Do you want to try and contact her?" he asked gently. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know. Part of me wants answers, but another part is terrified of being hurt again." As they talked late into the night, neither Sarah nor Michael realized that this conversation was the beginning of a deeper connection between them. The walls they had both built around their hearts began to crumble, brick by brick. Days turned into weeks, and a routine began to form. Michael found himself looking forward to coming home, the sound of Emma's laughter and the smell of Sarah's cooking filling the once empty apartment with life. Sarah, for her part, began to feel a sense of stability she hadn't known in years. But as their comfort with each other grew, so did the complications. Michael's colleagues continued to question his judgment, some even suggesting that his recent distraction at work could jeopardize important cases. Sarah overheard whispers at the cafe, customers speculating about her relationship with the rich lawyer who had taken her in. Despite the growing gossip and pressure, neither Michael nor Sarah could deny the bond that was forming between them. It wasn't just gratitude on Sarah's part or charity on Michael's. There was a genuine connection, a shared understanding of loss and the desire for a second chance. As Sarah tucked Emma into bed one night, the little girl asked a question that would set in motion a chain of events none of them could have anticipated. "Mommy," Emma said sleepily, "is Michael going to be my new daddy?" The innocent question hung in the air, laden with implications. Sarah felt her heart race as she realized that her feelings for Michael had grown far beyond simple gratitude. But before she could formulate a response, a knock at the apartment door shattered the moment. Michael answered, his expression changing from confusion to concern as he listened to the visitor. Turning to Sarah, his eyes held a mix of apprehension and determination. "Sarah," he said, his voice tight, "there's someone here who says he's your father. He says it's urgent, something about danger and needing to protect you." And just like that, the fragile peace they had built was shattered. as the secrets of Sarah's past came rushing back to claim her. Sarah's heart pounded as she approached the door, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. There, standing in the hallway, was her father, Frank. He looked older than she remembered, his face lined with worry and exhaustion. "Sarah," Frank breathed, his voice a mixture of relief and urgency. "Thank God I found you. We need to talk. It's not safe." Michael looked between Sarah and Frank, confusion evident on his face. "Perhaps we should all sit down," he suggested, ushering Frank into the living room. As they settled onto the couch, Emma's small voice called out from the bedroom. "Mommy, who's here?" "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah called back, her voice trembling slightly. "Go back to sleep. Mommy will be there soon." Frank's eyes widened at the sound of Emma's voice. "You have a child?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder and regret. Sarah nodded, her jaw set. "Yes, I do. A lot has happened in the years since you kicked me out." Frank flinched at her words but pressed on. "Sarah, I know you have every right to be angry with me, but right now we have bigger problems. Your life could be in danger." Michael leaned forward, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "What kind of danger? What's going on?" Frank took a deep breath, his eyes darting nervously to the windows. "It's a long story, but the short version is this: years ago, when I was working as a private investigator, I uncovered evidence of a massive corruption scheme involving some very powerful people in the city government. When they realized I knew, they threatened our family. That's why I pushed you away, Sarah. I thought if you hated me, you'd stay far away and be safe." Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to process this information. But why now? Why after all these years? "Because they found out you're alive and in Chicago," Frank replied, his voice grim. "I've been keeping tabs on you, making sure you were safe. When I saw you at that cafe with your mother, I knew it was only a matter of time before they discovered you too." Michael's brow furrowed. "Who are they? And what exactly do they want with Sarah?" Frank rubbed his face wearily. "High-ranking officials, business leaders, even some people in law enforcement. They think Sarah might have access to the evidence I gathered. As long as that evidence exists, they're at risk of exposure." Sarah shook her head, overwhelmed. "But I don't know anything about any evidence. I was just a teenager when all this happened." "I know," Frank said softly, "but they don't believe that. They think I must have told you something, hidden something with you." As the gravity of the situation sank in, Michael's protective instincts surged. "What can we do to keep Sarah and Emma safe?" Frank's eyes met Michael's, a silent understanding passing between them. "We need to find that evidence. It's the only way to end this once and for all." Sarah stood up abruptly, anger flashing in her eyes. "So that's it? You show up after years of silence, dump this bombshell on me, and expect me to just go along with whatever you say?" "Sarah," Michael said gently, reaching for her hand, "I know this is a lot to take in, but if what your father is saying is true, you and Emma could be in real danger." She pulled away from him, tears welling in her eyes. "And what about you? I can't ask you to get involved in this. You've already done so much for us." Michael stood, facing Sarah squarely. "You're not asking. I'm choosing to help. We're in this together now." As Sarah looked into Michael's eyes, she saw determination and something else, a depth of feeling that both thrilled and terrified her. She nodded slowly, accepting his support. Frank watched this exchange with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness, Sarah, but please believe me when I say that everything I did to protect you." Sarah turned to her father, years of pain and resentment warring with the desperate need to believe him. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said honestly. "But for now, I'll trust you. For Emma's sake." As the night wore on, they formulated a plan. Frank would reach out to old contacts, trying to piece together the location of the hidden evidence. Michael would use his legal expertise to explore official channels, looking for any signs of the corruption Frank had uncovered years ago. Sarah, much to her frustration, was tasked with keeping things as normal as possible to avoid raising suspicion. As Frank prepared to leave, he paused at the door, turning to Sarah. "I know it doesn't make up for the past, but I want you to know I'm proud of you, Sarah. You've been through so much, and you stayed strong. Your mother and I, we made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but we never stopped loving you." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes but held them back. "I need time," she said softly. "This is all too much to process right now." Frank nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. Just be careful, all of you." As the door closed behind Frank, Sarah felt the weight of the world settling on her shoulders. She turned to Michael, fear evident in her eyes. "What are we going to do?" Michael pulled her into a gentle embrace, his heart racing at the contact. "We're going to figure this out together, I promise." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of covert meetings, late-night research sessions, and mounting tension. Sarah continued her work at the cafe, hyper-aware of every customer, every glance that lingered too long. Michael found himself distracted at work, his mind constantly churning over the bits of information they were slowly piecing together. But one evening, as they pored over documents spread across Michael's dining room table, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her breath caught as she read the message, "We know what you're doing. Stop now, or the child pays." Michael, seeing the color drain from Sarah's face, was at her side in an instant. "What is it? What's wrong?" Sarah showed him the message, her hands shaking. "They know about Emma." "Oh God, Michael, what have I done? I put her in danger." Michael's jaw clenched as he read the threat. "We need to move her somewhere safe, now." Within hours, they had Emma packed and on her way to Michael's sister's house in Michigan. Sarah's heart broke as she hugged her daughter goodbye, promising it was just for a little while, that everything would be okay soon. As they watched the car drive away, Sarah turned to Michael, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. I don't know what I would do without you." Michael cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "You don't have to thank me, Sarah." He hesitated, the weight of his feelings overwhelming him. "I care about you, both of you, more than I ever thought possible." In that moment, with the threat looming over them and their emotions running high, Sarah did something she never expected. She leaned in and kissed Michael, pouring all her fear, gratitude, and growing love into the gesture. Michael responded with equal fervor, years of loneliness and grief melting away in the warmth of their embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, looking away. "I shouldn't have." "Don't," Michael interrupted, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. "Don't apologize. I've wanted to do that for weeks." As they stood there, the world seemed to fade away. For a moment there was no danger, no painful past, just two people finding solace and hope in each other. But reality came crashing back as Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time it was Frank. "Found something. Meet me at the old storage facility on 4th Street. Come alone." Sarah showed the message to Michael, conflict evident on her face. "I have to go," she said. "This could be the break we need." Michael shook his head. "It's too dangerous. Let me come with you." "No," Sarah insisted. "If this is a trap, I can't risk you getting hurt too. You've already done so much. Please, Michael, trust me." After a heated debate, Michael reluctantly agreed, but insisted on following at a distance, ready to intervene if needed. As Sarah approached the dimly lit storage facility, her heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea that her actions tonight would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything, not just for her and Michael, but for the entire city of Chicago. The rusty door creaked open, and Sarah stepped into the darkness, unaware that she was walking into a twist of fate that would test her strength, her love, and her very understanding of truth and justice. Sarah's footsteps echoed in the cavernous storage facility as she made her way through the maze of abandoned units. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of forgotten belongings. Her heart raced, every shadow seeming to conceal a potential threat. "Dad," she called out softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you here?" A shuffling sound from her left made her spin around. Frank emerged from behind a stack of crates, his face etched with worry and exhaustion. "Sarah," he breathed, relief evident in his voice. "You came. I wasn't sure you would." Sarah approached cautiously, still not entirely trusting the man who had abandoned her years ago. "You said you found something. What is it?" Frank glanced nervously over his shoulder before pulling out a small, battered notebook from his jacket. "This," he said, holding it out to her. "This is the key to everything. Names, dates, transactions, all the evidence of the corruption I uncovered." Sarah took the notebook with trembling hands, its weight seeming far greater than its small size would suggest. As she flipped through the pages, her eyes widened at the familiar names: prominent businessmen, politicians, even judges. "Dad, this is huge," she whispered, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "What do we do with it?" Before Frank could answer, a sharp sound cut through the air. Sarah felt a stinging sensation in her neck, her vision blurring almost immediately. As she stumbled, she saw Frank collapse beside her, a small dart protruding from his shoulder. "I'm sorry," was the last thing Sarah heard before darkness engulfed her. When Sarah regained consciousness, she found herself in a sterile, windowless room. The harsh fluorescent lights made her head throb as she struggled to piece together what had happened. Frank was nowhere to be seen. The door opened, and a man in an expensive suit walked in, flanked by two burly guards. Sarah recognized him immediately from the pages of the notebook: Robert Caldwell, one of the city's most prominent real estate developers. "MS. Thompson," Caldwell said, his voice smooth and controlled. "I apologize for the rather dramatic way we brought you here, but I'm afraid we have some urgent matters to discuss." Sarah's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. She thought of Michael, of Emma, of everything she stood to lose. "Where's my father?" she demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. Caldwell smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Thompson is fine, for now. His well-being and yours depends entirely on your cooperation." As Caldwell laid out his terms, the notebook in exchange for their freedom, Sarah felt a mix of terror and determination. She knew that giving in would mean letting the corruption continue, potentially harming countless lives. But refusing could cost her everything. Meanwhile, Michael was frantic with worry. When Sarah failed to return from the meeting with Frank, he'd immediately sprung into action. Using his legal connections, he managed to obtain security camera footage from near the storage facility. The grainy images showed Sarah and Frank being loaded into a black SUV. Determined to find her, Michael delved deeper into the web of corruption they'd been unraveling. He called in favors, pored over financial records, and pieced together a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts. As he worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, Michael was confronted with a harsh reality. Some of the names implicated in the corruption scheme were partners at his own law firm. The very cases he'd been working on for years were part of the cover-up. Torn between his professional obligations and his growing feelings for Sarah, Michael faced the most difficult decision of his career. Exposing the truth could mean losing everything he'd worked for, but staying silent would mean betraying Sarah and everything he believed in. Back in the windowless room, Sarah was grappling with her own moral dilemma. Caldwell had given her an ultimatum: reveal the location of any copies of the notebook or face the consequences. "We know about your daughter, MS. Thompson," Caldwell said, his voice laced with thinly veiled threat. "Emma, isn't it? It would be a shame if anything were to happen to her." Sarah's blood ran cold at the mention of Emma's name. She thought of her daughter, safe with Michael's sister, unaware of the danger looming over her. The need to protect her child warred with Sarah's desire to do the right thing. As the hours ticked by, both Sarah and Michael found themselves pushed to their limits. Sarah, isolated and under constant pressure, clung to thoughts of Emma and Michael for strength. Michael, racing against time to uncover the truth, was fueled by his determination to save Sarah and bring the corrupt officials to justice. Little did they know, their separate struggles were about to converge in a way that would shake the foundations of Chicago's power structure and test the strength of their newfound bond. As the investigation deepened, Michael's health began to suffer. Late nights poring over documents and the constant stress of the situation took their toll. He developed persistent headaches and dizzy spells, but stubbornly pushed through, driven by his need to find Sarah. One morning, as he was preparing for a crucial meeting with a potential whistleblower, Michael collapsed in his apartment. When he came to, he found himself in a hospital bed, a concerned doctor standing over him. "Mr. Anderson," the doctor said gravely, "I'm afraid I have some concerning news. Your collapse wasn't just from exhaustion. We found a mass in your brain that requires immediate attention." The diagnosis hit Michael like a physical blow. A brain tumor. The timing couldn't have been worse. Every instinct screamed at him to continue his search for Sarah, but the reality of his condition couldn't be ignored. As he lay in the hospital bed, waiting for more tests, Michael was confronted with the fragility of life. He thought of Claire, of the future they'd planned together, cut short by illness. Now, just as he'd found a reason to hope again with Sarah, his own mortality was staring him in the face. The next few days were a blur of medical jargon, concerned visitors, and difficult decisions. The tumor was operable, but the surgery carried risks. There was a chance he could lose his memory, his ability to practice law, or worse. Michael's colleagues from the law firm visited, their concern mixed with curiosity about his recent erratic behavior. He was torn between confiding in them about the corruption he'd uncovered and protecting the investigation. James, his closest friend at the firm, sensed something was amiss. "Mike," he said quietly, when they were alone, "what's really going on? This is about more than just that woman and her kid, isn't it?" Michael hesitated, weighing his options. Finally, the need for an ally outweighed his caution. He told James everything about Sarah, the corruption, the dangers they faced. James listened in stunned silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. When Michael finished, James sat back, running a hand through his hair. "Jesus, Mike. This is big. Bigger than anything we've dealt with before. What can I do to help?" Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him. "I need you to keep digging while I'm in surgery. There's a file on my home computer. The password is Emma's future. Everything I found is in there." As James left, promising to continue the investigation, Michael felt a mix of hope and apprehension. He was putting a lot of trust in his friend, but he had no choice. With his surgery looming, he needed someone to keep pushing for the truth. The night before his operation, Michael received an unexpected visitor. Linda, Sarah's mother, slipped into his hospital room, her face etched with worry. "Mr. Anderson," she said softly, "I know we haven't met, but I needed to see you. Sarah. She's in danger, isn't she?" Michael nodded gravely, seeing no point in denying it. "We're doing everything we can to find her, Mrs. Thompson." Linda sank into the chair by his bed, her shoulders slumped. "This is all our fault. Frank and we thought we were protecting her by pushing her away. But we only made her more vulnerable." As Linda shared her side of the story, Michael began to see the full picture of Sarah's past. The pain, the misunderstandings, the love that had been buried under years of fear and secrecy. Mrs. Thompson, Michael said, reaching out to take her hand. "We're going to bring Sarah home, and when we do, you'll have a chance to make things right." Linda squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson, for everything you've done for my daughter and granddaughter. I pray you'll have the chance to continue being there for them." As Linda left, Michael felt the weight of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. He had to survive this surgery, not just for himself, but for Sarah, for Emma, for the chance to bring a family back together. The morning of the surgery arrived all too quickly. As the nurses prepared him for the operation, Michael closed his eyes, thinking of Sarah. He imagined her smile, the sound of her laugh, the feel of her hand in his. "Wait for me," he whispered. "I'm coming for you." As the anesthesia began to take effect, Michael's last conscious thought was a promise to Sarah, to Emma, to himself. He would survive this. He would uncover the truth. He would make things right. While Michael fought his own battle in the hospital, Sarah was facing challenges of her own. The days of captivity had begun to blur together, punctuated only by Caldwell's increasingly frustrated interrogations. Sarah had managed to resist their demands so far, but she could feel her resolve weakening. The constant threat to Emma's safety wore on her, chipping away at her determination. One particularly grueling day, as Caldwell left her alone once again, Sarah curled up in the corner of her room, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. She thought of Emma, wondering if her daughter was safe, if she was scared without her mother. She thought of Michael, hoping against hope that he was still searching for her. As she sat there, teetering on the edge of despair, Sarah's hand brushed against something in her pocket. Puzzled, she pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. With trembling fingers, she opened it to find a note in Michael's handwriting. "Sarah, if you're reading this, it means things haven't gone as planned. But don't give up hope. Remember your strength. Remember your love for Emma. Remember that you're not alone. I believe in you. Stay strong. I'm coming for you, Michael." Sarah pressed the note to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She had no idea how Michael had managed to slip the note into her pocket, but its presence gave her a renewed sense of hope and determination. With renewed vigor, Sarah began to look at her situation with fresh eyes. She started paying closer attention to the routines of her guards, the layout of the building during her brief trips to the interrogation room, any potential weaknesses in their security. As she bided her time, gathering information and building her strength, Sarah was unaware of the wheels being set in motion outside her prison. James, armed with the information Michael had provided, was making significant progress in unraveling the corruption scheme. Using his position at the law firm, James carefully probed into suspicious cases, cross-referencing them with the names and dates in Michael's files. He reached out to trusted contacts in the police force and the district attorney's office, slowly building a network of allies. But as James dug deeper, he began to realize the true extent of the corruption. It wasn't just confined to a few businessmen and politicians. The rot had spread throughout multiple levels of city government, law enforcement, and even the judicial system. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous his position became. James began to notice subtle changes, colleagues watching him more closely, unusual activity on his computer, a black car that seemed to follow him home from work. Despite the growing risk, James pressed on. He thought of Michael, lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. He thought of Sarah, held captive somewhere, possibly enduring who knows what. And he thought of little Emma, an innocent child caught in the middle of this web of corruption and deceit. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, James realized that they were on the verge of uncovering something much bigger than they had initially thought. This wasn't just about local corruption, it had the potential to shake the very foundations of power in Chicago. With Michael still unconscious after his surgery and Sarah's whereabouts unknown, James found himself at the center of a storm that threatened to engulf them all. The clock was ticking, and he knew that every moment counted. Little did any of them know, the next 48 hours would bring revelations and confrontations that would change their lives forever. The stage was set for a showdown that would test their courage, their integrity, and the strength of the bonds they had forged in the face of adversity. The tension in the air was palpable as James walked into the offices of the Chicago Tribune. He had spent the last 48 hours compiling all the evidence he and Michael had gathered, cross-referencing it with public records and confidential informants. What he had uncovered was explosive, to say the least. As he sat across from Rebecca Lawson, the Tribune's top investigative journalist, James felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "Ms. Lawson," he began, his voice low and urgent, "what I'm about to show you will change everything. But before I do, I need your word that you'll protect your sources." Rebecca's eyes narrowed, sensing the gravity of the situation. "You have it, Mr. Cooper. Now what do you have for me?" James pulled out a thick file from his briefcase and laid it on the desk between them. "This," he said, tapping the folder, "is evidence of a corruption scheme that goes to the very heart of Chicago's government, law enforcement, and business community." For the next 2 hours, James walked Rebecca through the intricate web of bribery, money laundering, and abuse of power that he and Michael had uncovered. Rebecca's eyes widened as she recognized name after name prominent politicians, judges, business leaders she had interviewed and written about over the years. This is incredible," Rebecca breathed, poring over the documents. "But why come to me? Why not go straight to the FBI or the state's attorney?" James's face darkened. "Because we don't know how deep this goes. There are names on that list from every level of law enforcement. We can't be sure who to trust." As Rebecca began to grasp the full implications of what she was seeing, a fire lit in her eyes. "Mr. Cooper, if what you're saying is true, this could be the biggest story of the decade. But it's also incredibly dangerous. Are you prepared for what might happen when this goes public?" James nodded grimly. "I have to be. My friend Michael is lying in a hospital bed right now because of this. Another woman, Sarah, is being held captive somewhere in the city. And there's a little girl whose future depends on us exposing the truth." Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her mind already racing with the possibilities. "All right, I'm in, but we need to move fast. Once we start digging, they'll know we're onto them." As Rebecca and her team began working on verifying the information and preparing the story, James turned his attention to finding Sarah. He had a hunch that her captors would be getting desperate, knowing that their time was running out. Using the resources at his disposal from the law firm, James began tracking the movements of key players in the corruption scheme. He pored over financial records, property deeds, and surveillance footage, looking for any clue that might lead him to Sarah's location. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah was reaching her breaking point. Days of isolation and interrogation had taken their toll, both physically and mentally. But the note from Michael, still clutched tightly in her hand, gave her the strength to hold on. As Caldwell entered the room for what felt like the 100th time, Sarah noticed something different in his demeanor. There was a tension in his shoulders, a flicker of fear in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Ms. Thompson," he said, his voice strained, "I'm going to give you one last chance. Tell us where the evidence is, and this can all be over. You can go home to your daughter." Sarah looked up at him, a newfound defiance in her eyes. "You're scared," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Something's changed, hasn't it? You know you're running out of time." Caldwell's composure slipped for a moment, anger flashing across his face. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, you stupid girl. Do you think your lawyer friend can protect you? Do you think we don't know about his surgery? About how vulnerable he is right now?" Sarah's heart clenched at the mention of Michael, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice low and determined. "You're right, I don't know what I'm dealing with. But I do know one thing: people like you, who prey on the weak and abuse their power, always fall in the end. And I'm going to be there to watch when you do." Caldwell's face contorted with rage. He raised his hand as if to strike her, but at the last moment he seemed to think better of it. "You've made your choice," he spat. "Now deal with the consequences." As he stormed out of the room, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and triumph. She had gotten under his skin, revealed his vulnerability, but she also knew that she had just raised the stakes dramatically. Across the city, in a dimly lit hospital room, Michael Anderson was fighting his own battle. The surgery had been long and complicated, and he had yet to regain consciousness. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but warned his family that the next 24 hours would be critical. Linda Thompson sat by his bedside, holding his hand and whispering words of encouragement. Despite their brief acquaintance, she felt a deep connection to this man who had risked everything to help her daughter. "You have to wake up, Michael," she murmured. "Sarah needs you. Emma needs you. We all need you." As if in response to her words, Michael's fingers twitched slightly in her grasp. Linda's breath caught in her throat. "Michael," she said, hope rising in her voice. "Michael, can you hear me?" Slowly, painfully, Michael's eyes flickered open. He blinked, trying to focus on the figure beside him. "Sarah," he croaked, his voice barely audible. Linda's heart broke a little at the hope and love she heard in that single word. "No, Michael, it's Linda, Sarah's mother. You're in the hospital. You've had surgery." As awareness slowly returned to Michael, so did the urgency of their situation. He tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through his head. "Sarah," he gasped. "We have to find Sarah." Linda gently pushed him back onto the pillow. "Easy, Michael. You're in no condition to go anywhere right now. But don't worry, we're not giving up. Your friend James has been working tirelessly to find her." At that moment, as if summoned by her words, James burst into the room. His eyes widened in surprise and relief when he saw Michael awake. "Mike, thank God you're awake. We've got a lead on Sarah's location." Michael struggled to focus on James's words as he quickly explained about the evidence, the newspaper, and his investigation into Sarah's whereabouts. Despite the fog of pain and medication, Michael felt a surge of hope. "We have to move now," Michael insisted, once again trying to get out of bed. "If they know we're close, they might try to move her," or he couldn't bring himself to finish the thought. James and Linda exchanged worried glances. "Michael," James said gently, "you're in no condition to go anywhere, but I promise you, we're going to bring Sarah home." As James prepared to leave, Michael grabbed his arm. "Wait," he said, his voice stronger now. "There's something you need to know, something I remembered during the surgery." James leaned in close as Michael whispered in his ear. His eyes widened in shock as he straightened up. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice tense. Michael nodded grimly. "Positive. Be careful, James. This goes deeper than we thought." As James hurried out of the room, Linda looked between the two men, confusion and worry etched on her face. "What is it? What did you remember?" Michael closed his eyes, exhaustion overtaking him. "The key to everything," he murmured. "The one person who can bring it all crashing down." As Michael drifted back into unconsciousness, Linda sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the precipice of something monumental, something that would change all their lives forever. Across town, in the abandoned warehouse where Sarah was being held, tension was reaching a boiling point. Caldwell paced back and forth, barking orders into his phone. "I don't care what it takes," he snarled. "Find out how much they know and shut it down. Now." In the small room where Sarah was being held, she could sense the change in atmosphere. The guards were nervous, their eyes constantly darting to their phones. Something was happening, and Sarah knew she had to be ready. As night fell over Chicago, all the players in this high-stakes game were making their moves. James and a team of trusted police officers were closing in on Sarah's location. Rebecca Lawson and her team at the Chicago Tribune were putting the finishing touches on their explosive expose. And in a hospital room, Michael Anderson was fighting to regain his strength, driven by the need to save the woman he loved. Little did any of them know, the events of the next few hours would shake the city of Chicago to its very core, exposing decades of corruption and forever changing the lives of everyone involved. The stage was set for a showdown that would test their courage, their integrity, and the strength of the bonds they had forged in the face of adversity. The night air was thick with tension as James led a team of trusted police officers towards the abandoned warehouse where they believed Sarah was being held. The dilapidated building loomed before them, its windows dark and foreboding. James's heart raced, knowing that every second counted. Silently, he said a quick prayer, asking for divine protection and guidance. Remember, he whispered to the officers, we don't know how many are inside or how they're armed. Our priority is getting Sarah out safely. May God be with us. As they approached the building, a sudden burst of gunfire shattered the silence. James and the officers dove for cover, the sound of bullets ricocheting off nearby vehicles filling the air. They knew we were coming, one of the officers hissed. Someone must have tipped them off. James's mind raced. Could there be a mole in their team? Or had Caldwell's paranoia finally paid off? Either way, the element of surprise was gone, and Sarah was in more danger than ever. He closed his eyes briefly, sending another silent plea to heaven. Inside the warehouse, Sarah's head snapped up at the sound of gunfire. Her heart pounded as she realized that this might be her only chance at escape. With renewed determination, she began working at the ropes binding her wrists, ignoring the pain as the rough fibers cut into her skin. Please, God, she whispered, give me strength. Caldwell burst into the room, his face contorted with rage and fear. It's over, he snarled, grabbing Sarah roughly by the arm. We're leaving. Now. As he dragged her towards the door, Sarah made her move. Using all the strength she could muster, she slammed her head back, catching Caldwell squarely in the nose. He staggered, his grip loosening just enough for Sarah to wrench herself free. She ran, her bare feet slapping against the cold concrete floor. Behind her, she could hear Caldwell's enraged shouts and the pounding of footsteps. Sarah's lungs burned as she pushed herself harder, desperation giving her speed she didn't know she possessed. Lord, protect me, she breathed as she ran. Outside, the gunfight continued. James and the officers had managed to advance closer to the building, but they were pinned down by heavy fire from the upper windows. We need backup, one of the officers shouted into his radio. Suspects are heavily armed and... But his words were cut off by a deafening explosion. The ground shook as flames erupted from one side of the warehouse. In the chaos that followed, James saw a figure emerge from a side door, running full tilt towards the perimeter. Sarah, he yelled, recognizing her even at a distance. Without hesitation, he broke cover and sprinted towards her, bullets whizzing past his head. God, protect her, he prayed fervently as he ran. Sarah heard James's voice and changed course, heading towards the sound. Through the smoke and confusion, she saw him running towards her. For a moment, hope surged through her. They were so close to freedom. But fate had other plans. A sharp crack split the air, and Sarah stumbled. At first, she didn't feel any pain, just a strange numbness spreading through her side. It wasn't until she looked down and saw the rapidly spreading red stain on her shirt that she realized she'd been shot. No, James's anguished cry seemed to come from far away as Sarah collapsed to the ground. He reached her just as her knees buckled, catching her before she hit the pavement. Stay with me, Sarah, he pleaded, pressing his hand against the wound in a futile attempt to stem the bleeding. Help is coming. You have to hold on. God, please don't take her from us. Sarah's vision blurred, the world around her growing dim. She thought of Emma, of the life they'd dreamed of having. She thought of Michael, wishing she could see his face one last time. In that moment, she felt a peace wash over her, a feeling of being held by something greater than herself. Tell Emma I love her, she whispered, her voice weak. And Michael. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him to keep faith. As Sarah's eyes fluttered closed, James felt a wave of despair wash over him. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything they'd been through. Please, God, he prayed aloud, his voice choked with emotion. Don't let it end like this. Give her strength. Give us all strength. The sound of sirens filled the air as ambulances and police reinforcements arrived on the scene. The firefight was dying down, the suspects inside the warehouse either surrendering or being apprehended. But for James, it all faded into the background as he cradled Sarah's limp form, silently willing her to hold on. Across town in his hospital room, Michael jolted awake, a sense of dread overwhelming him. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. Instinctively, he reached for the small cross he kept by his bedside, clutching it tightly. Linda, who had been dozing in the chair beside his bed, startled at his sudden movement. "Michael, what is it?" Before he could answer, the door burst open. A nurse rushed in, her face grave. "Mr. Anderson, there's been an incident. A woman has been brought in with a gunshot wound. They think it might be Sarah Thompson." Michael's world tilted on its axis. Despite the pain and dizziness from his recent surgery, he struggled to get out of bed. "I have to see her," he insisted, his voice hoarse with fear and desperation. "God, please, let her be all right." Linda tried to hold him back, but Michael was beyond reason. With a strength born of love and fear, he pushed past the nurse and staggered into the hallway. The emergency room was a flurry of activity. Michael could hear shouted orders and the beeping of machines as he made his way towards the center of the commotion. And there, on a gurney surrounded by doctors and nurses, was Sarah. She looked so small, so pale. The stark white of the hospital sheets was marred by the crimson of her blood. Michael felt his knees go weak at the sight. "Sarah," he whispered, reaching out to touch her hand. It was cold, so cold. "Please, God, don't take her from me. Not now. Not like this." One of the doctors looked up, his face etched with sympathy. "Sir, you can't be here. We need to get her into surgery immediately." But Michael couldn't move. He stood there, his eyes fixed on Sarah's face, willing her to open her eyes to give him some sign that she was still fighting. "I'm here, Sarah," he murmured. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Keep fighting. God is with you, with all of us." As they wheeled her away towards the operating room, Michael felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see James, his clothes stained with Sarah's blood. "She's strong," James said, his voice rough with emotion. "She'll pull through this. We have to believe that." Michael nodded numbly, unable to form words. The weight of everything, his own surgery, the corruption they'd uncovered, and now Sarah's life hanging in the balance, came crashing down on him. His legs gave way, and James caught him just before he hit the floor. Together they made their way to the hospital chapel. It was a small, quiet space, lit softly by flickering candles. Michael sank to his knees before the altar, his body shaking with silent sobs. James knelt beside him, a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Lord." Michael prayed, his voice barely above a whisper, "I know I haven't always been the most faithful servant, but please, if you're listening, don't take Sarah from us. She's fought so hard, overcome so much. Give her the strength to fight this battle too, and if it's her time to come home to you, please give us the strength to accept your will." James joined in the prayer, his own voice thick with emotion. "God, we've seen your hand at work in bringing Sarah and Michael together, in protecting them through so many trials. We ask for your protection now. Wrap Sarah in your loving arms, guide the hands of the surgeons, and give us all the faith to trust in your plan." As they prayed, a sense of calm began to settle over them. It wasn't a magical solution to their fears, but a quiet reassurance that whatever happened, they weren't alone in this struggle. Hours passed like days as they waited for news. Emma, who had been brought to the hospital by Michael's sister, sat quietly in Linda's lap, too young to fully understand what was happening but old enough to sense the gravity of the situation. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a surgeon emerged from the operating room. His face was lined with exhaustion, but there was a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "She's alive," he announced, and a collective sigh of relief swept through the waiting room. "The next 24 hours will be critical, but she's a fighter. I've rarely seen someone pull through a trauma like this, but if anyone can do it, it's her." Michael sagged against James, tears of relief streaming down his face. "Thank you, God," he whispered. "Thank you for giving her back to us." Emma, sensing the change in mood, perked up. "Is Mummy okay?" she asked, her small voice filled with hope. Linda hugged her granddaughter close. "She's very sick, sweetheart, but the doctors are taking good care of her. We need to be strong for her, okay? And keep praying for her." As the initial relief faded, the reality of the long road ahead began to set in. Sarah was alive, but she wasn't out of danger. The physical wounds would heal, but the emotional scars of her ordeal would take much longer to fade. In the days that followed, as Sarah fought for her life in the ICU, Michael found himself returning to the chapel time and time again. He prayed for Sarah's recovery, for strength for their family, and for guidance in the uncertain days ahead. One night, as he sat in the quiet of the chapel, Michael felt a presence beside him. He opened his eyes to see an elderly chaplain sitting next to him. "You've been carrying a heavy burden, my son," the chaplain said gently. Michael nodded, feeling the weight of the past months pressing down on him. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," he admitted. "I want to have faith, but I'm so scared." The chaplain smiled kindly. "Faith isn't about never being afraid, my boy. It's about finding the courage to keep going even when you are afraid. Your love for Sarah, your devotion to your family, that's faith in action. God sees that, and He is with you." As Michael left the chapel that night, he felt a renewed sense of purpose and hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but with faith, love, and the support of their community, they would face it together. Sarah's recovery was slow and painful, but with each passing day she grew stronger. When she finally opened her eyes, squeezing Michael's hand weakly, he felt as if he was witnessing a miracle. "I knew you'd come back to us," he whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "God wasn't ready to let you go just yet." Sarah managed a small smile. "I felt him there," she said softly. When I thought I might not make it. I felt surrounded by love. It gave me the strength to hold on." As Sarah continued to recover, their ordeal brought them closer not only to each other but to their faith. They found strength in prayer, comfort in their community, and a deeper appreciation for the precious gift of life. The journey ahead would not be easy, but with their love for each other, their faith in God, and the support of their friends and family, Sarah and Michael knew they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their story was far from over. It was just beginning a new chapter, one filled with hope, healing, and the enduring power of love and faith. As the dust settled from the trials and the city of Chicago began its slow process of healing, Sarah found herself grappling with an unexpected revelation. It came on a quiet Sunday afternoon, as she was sorting through old family photos with her mother, Linda. "Sarah, sweetheart," Linda began, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Sarah looked up, sensing the gravity in her mother's tone. "What is it, Mom?" Linda took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she pulled out an old, yellowed envelope from her purse. "You're adopted, Sarah. Your father and I. We're not your biological parents." The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sarah struggled to process this information. "What? How? Why didn't you tell me before?" Tears welled up in Linda's eyes as she explained. "We wanted to, so many times, but then all the trouble with your father's investigation started, and we were so focused on keeping you safe. It never seemed like the right time." As Linda shared the story of Sarah's adoption, a desperate teenage mother, a closed adoption facilitated by a now-defunct agency. Sarah's mind reeled. Everything she thought she knew about herself, about her identity, was suddenly thrown into question. "Do you know anything about my birth parents?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Linda shook her head sadly. "Very little. The adoption was closed and the records were sealed. We only know that your birth mother was very young and that she wanted you to have a better life than she could provide." The revelation sent Sarah into a tailspin of emotions. She felt betrayed by the parents she'd known all her life, yet grateful for the love and protection they'd provided. She felt a strange sense of loss for the biological parents she'd never known, coupled with a burning curiosity about her true origins. When Michael came home that evening, he found Sarah sitting on the floor of their apartment, surrounded by old photos and documents. One look at her face told him something was terribly wrong. "Sarah," he asked gently, kneeling beside her, "what's happened?" Through tears, Sarah explained what she'd learned. Michael listened, his heart breaking for the woman he loved as she grappled with this earth-shattering news. "I don't know who I am anymore," Sarah confessed, her voice cracking. "Everything I thought I knew about myself, my family, it's all a lie." Michael pulled her close, his voice firm but gentle. "You're still you, Sarah. You're still the amazing, strong, beautiful woman I fell in love with. This doesn't change who you are at your core." As the days passed, Sarah's need to uncover the truth about her biological parents grew. With Michael's support and James's legal expertise, they began the process of trying to unseal her adoption records. The search led them down unexpected paths. As they dug deeper into the circumstances of Sarah's adoption, they uncovered disturbing links to the very corruption scandal they'd just helped expose. It turned out that the adoption agency that had handled Sarah's case had been a front for a baby trafficking ring, targeting vulnerable young mothers and selling their babies to wealthy couples. The revelation sent shockwaves through the city, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. As the investigation progressed, Sarah found herself at the center of a media storm once again. The story of the corruption-busting heroine discovering her own connection to a decades-old scandal was too juicy for the press to ignore. The pressure began to take its toll on Sarah. Nightmares of her captivity, which had begun to subside, returned with a vengeance. She became withdrawn, struggling to connect with Michael and even little Emma. One night, as Sarah tossed and turned, caught in the grip of another nightmare, Michael made a decision. Gently waking her, he took her hands in his. "Sarah," he said softly, "I think we need to get away for a while. All of us, you, me, and Emma. Somewhere quiet, away from all of this." Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "But what about the investigation? What about finding my birth parents?" Michael squeezed her hands reassuringly. "It will all still be here when we get back. But right now, you need to heal. We all do." The next morning, they packed up the car and headed out of the city, with no real destination in mind. As the Chicago skyline faded in the rearview mirror, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. They ended up in a small coastal town in Michigan, renting a tiny cottage right on the beach. The days blurred together in a peaceful haze of long walks on the sand, quiet family dinners, and nights spent stargazing on the porch. Slowly but surely, Sarah began to find her center again. Away from the constant reminders of her trauma and the pressure of the ongoing investigation, she rediscovered the simple joys of being a mother to Emma and a partner to Michael. It was during this time that Sarah made a profound realization. Watching Emma build sandcastles with Michael, her laughter carried on the ocean breeze, Sarah understood that family wasn't defined by blood or DNA. It was defined by love, by choice, by the connections we forge and nurture. One evening, as they sat on the beach watching the sunset, Sarah turned to Michael. "I think I'm ready to go back," she said softly. Michael looked at her, searching her face. "Are you sure?" Sarah nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. I am. I still want to know the truth about where I came from. But I realize now that it doesn't define who I am. You, Emma, my parents, you're my family, that's what matters most. As they packed up to return to Chicago, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in years. She was ready to face whatever truths the investigation might uncover, secure in the knowledge of who she was and where she belonged. Little did Sarah know, the biggest surprise was yet to come. Back in Chicago, a breakthrough in the investigation would lead to a revelation that would shake her world once again, but this time she was ready to face it head-on, with her chosen family by her side. The unexpected twist in Sarah's story served as a powerful reminder that sometimes the most profound truths about ourselves come not from our origins, but from the lives we choose to lead and the people we choose to love. As Sarah, Michael, and Emma drove back towards the city, they were ready to write the next chapter of their story together, whatever it might bring. As Sarah, Michael, and Emma returned to Chicago, the city seemed different somehow. The air was charged with a sense of anticipation, as if the very streets knew that a pivotal moment was approaching. They settled back into their apartment, the peace they had found in Michigan still lingering around them like a protective bubble. But that bubble was soon to burst. It was a crisp autumn morning when the call came. James's voice on the other end of the line was tense with excitement. Sarah, we've found something. You need to come to the office right away. Sarah's heart raced as she and Michael made their way to James's law firm. Emma was safely dropped off at Linda's with promises of explanations later. As they entered the conference room, Sarah was struck by the somber expressions on the faces gathered there. James, Rebecca from the Tribune, and a woman Sarah didn't recognize were seated around the table, a thick file folder in front of them. Sarah, Michael, please sit down, James began, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. We've made a breakthrough in the investigation into your adoption, but I have to warn you, what we've uncovered is, well, it's going to be a lot to process. Sarah gripped Michael's hand tightly as James began to explain. The woman she didn't recognize was introduced as Detective Maria Ortiz, who had been working on cold cases related to the corruption scandal. MS. Thompson, Detective Ortiz said, her dark eyes filled with compassion. We've managed to trace your biological parents. Your mother was a young woman named Eliza Jennings. She was just 16 when you were born. Sarah leaned forward, her heart pounding. And my father. The detective hesitated, exchanging a glance with James before continuing. Your biological father was Robert Caldwell. The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. Caldwell, the man behind her kidnapping, the architect of so much of the corruption they had fought against. The man who had nearly destroyed her life was, in fact, her father. No, Sarah whispered, shaking her head in denial. That's not possible. It can't be. But as Detective Ortiz laid out the evidence, DNA tests, old records unearthed from the corrupt adoption agency, statements from former associates of Caldwell, the truth became undeniable. Michael, his face pale with shock, asked the question Sarah couldn't bring herself to voice. Did Caldwell know? When he kidnapped Sarah, did he know she was his daughter? James nodded grimly. It appears so. From what we've pieced together, Caldwell had been keeping tabs on Sarah her entire life. When Frank Thompson started investigating the corruption, Caldwell realized the connection. He saw Sarah as both a threat and a way to tie up loose ends from his past. Sarah felt as if the room was spinning. The man who had tormented her, threatened her child, nearly killed her was her father. The very blood running through her veins was tainted by his evil. I think I'm going to be sick, she muttered, stumbling to her feet. Michael was there in an instant, supporting her, guiding her to a nearby trash can, where she retched violently. As he held her hair back, murmuring soothing words, Sarah felt as if her entire world was crumbling around her. When she had collected herself enough to return to the table, Detective Ortiz continued with the rest of the story. Eliza Jennings had been a student at a prestigious private school where Caldwell was a major donor. Their relationship, if it could be called that, had been brief and coerced. When Eliza became pregnant, Caldwell had used his influence to cover it up, forcing her to give the baby up for adoption. "We've managed to locate Eliza," the detective said softly. "She's alive, Sarah, and she wants to meet you, if you're willing." Sarah sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything she had just learned. Her real mother, was out there, wanting to meet her, but the shadow of Caldwell loomed large over everything, tainting even this potential for connection. As the implications of this revelation sank in, the room erupted into a flurry of activity. James and Rebecca began discussing the legal and journalistic ramifications of this discovery, while Detective Ortiz offered to arrange a meeting with Eliza Jennings. Through it all, Sarah sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling. Michael remained by her side, a steady presence in the chaos of her thoughts. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need some air." Michael immediately stood, guiding her out of the conference room and onto the balcony of the law office. The Chicago skyline stretched out before them, a stark reminder of all they had been through in this city. "Talk to me," Sarah Michael said gently, his hand resting comfortingly on her back. "What are you thinking?" Sarah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know what to think, Michael. Caldwell, he's my father. The man who kidnapped me, who threatened Emma, who nearly killed me. He's my flesh and blood. How am I supposed to reconcile that?" Michael pulled her close, his embrace a shield against the harsh reality they were facing. "Listen to me, Sarah. Caldwell may be your biological father, but he is not your family. Family is more than blood. It's the people who love you, who stand by you. That's me, Emma. Your parents who raised you. That's who your real family is." Sarah clung to him, drawing strength from his words and his presence. As her sobs subsided, she pulled back, wiping her eyes. "You're right. I know you're right. But what do I do now? Do I meet Eliza? Do I tell Emma? How do I move forward knowing what I know?" Michael cupped her face gently, his eyes filled with love and determination. "We take it one step at a time, together. If you want to meet Eliza, I'll be right there with you. If you don't, that's okay too. As for Emma, we'll figure out how to explain this to her when the time is right. But remember, Sarah, this doesn't change who you are. You're still the amazing, strong woman I fell in love with." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath. She turned back to the city view, her mind racing with possibilities. I think I want to meet her. Eliza, I have so many questions, and maybe it will help me understand myself better." Michael squeezed her hand supportively. "Then that's what we'll do." They returned to the conference room, where the others were waiting anxiously. Sarah straightened her shoulders, facing them with newfound resolve. "I want to meet Eliza," she announced. "Detective Ortiz, can you arrange it?" The detective nodded, a small smile on her face. "Of course. I'll set it up for whenever you're ready." As they began to discuss the logistics of the meeting, Sarah felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. She was about to meet the woman who had given birth to her, who had been forced to give her up. It was a moment she had never dared to imagine, and now it was becoming a reality. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Sarah spent hours talking with Linda and Frank, reassuring them that no matter what happened with Eliza, they would always be her parents. She and Michael had gentle conversations with Emma, explaining in simple terms that Mummy was going to meet someone very special from her past. Finally, the day of the meeting arrived. Sarah stood in front of the mirror, scrutinizing her reflection. She had chosen a simple blue dress, wanting to look nice but not overly formal. Her hands shook slightly as she fastened her necklace, a gift from Michael, a small heart pendant that seemed to give her strength. "You ready?" Michael asked softly from the doorway. Sarah took a deep breath, nodding. "As I'll ever be." The drive to the small cafe where they had arranged to meet Eliza seemed to take both an eternity and no time at all. As they pulled into the parking lot, Sarah's anxiety peaked. "What if she doesn't like me?" she whispered, voicing her deepest fear. "What if I'm a disappointment to her?" Michael took her hand, his touch grounding her. "That's not possible, Sarah. You're amazing and she's going to see that. Just be yourself." With one last deep breath, Sarah stepped out of the car. Hand in hand with Michael, she walked into the cafe, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on a woman sitting alone at a corner table. Even from a distance, Sarah could see the resemblance: the same wavy brown hair, the same slightly pointed chin. Eliza looked up, her eyes widening as she saw Sarah. She stood slowly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. For a moment they just stared at each other, years of separation and unspoken words hanging in the air between them. Then, almost in unison, they stepped forward. "Sarah," Eliza breathed, her voice choked with emotion. "You're so beautiful." And suddenly Sarah was in her birth mother's arms, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. It wasn't a magical solution to all the confusion and pain of the past, but it was a beginning, a chance to heal, to understand, to forge a new kind of relationship. As they sat down to talk, Michael discreetly stepped away, giving them privacy. Sarah listened as Eliza shared her story, the fear and shame of her teenage pregnancy, the pressure from Caldwell and his powerful family, the years of regret and wondering about the daughter she had been forced to give up. "I want you to know," Eliza said, reaching across the table to take Sarah's hand, "that giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done. Not a day has gone by that I haven't thought of you, wondered about you, loved you from afar." Sarah felt tears welling up again. "I understand," she said softly, "and I don't blame you. You were so young, and Caldwell, he didn't give you a choice." As they continued to talk, sharing stories and beginning to build a bridge across the years that had separated them, Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She realized that meeting Eliza hadn't erased the pain of the past, but it had given her a new perspective, a fuller understanding of where she came from. Hours passed, and finally Michael gently reminded Sarah that Emma would be waiting for them at home. As they prepared to leave, Eliza hesitated, then pulled a small box from her purse. "I've kept this all these years," she said, handing it to Sarah. "I always hoped I'd be able to give it to you one day." Sarah opened the box to find a delicate silver locket. Inside was a tiny photo of Eliza holding a newborn baby. On the other side was an inscription: "To my darling daughter, always in my heart." Overwhelmed, Sarah hugged Eliza tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, for meeting me, for everything." As they said their goodbyes, with promises to keep in touch and meet again soon, Sarah felt a sense of completion she had never known before. She had faced her past, confronted the darkest parts of her origins, and come out stronger on the other side. Walking back to the car with Michael, Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. She had found answers to questions she hadn't even known she had, and in doing so, had reaffirmed the strength of the family she had chosen. "You okay?" Michael asked as they drove home, his hand resting comfortingly on her knee. Sarah smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up her whole face. "You know what? I really am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I know who I am. All of who I am." As they pulled up to their apartment, Sarah saw Emma's face pressed against the window, waiting eagerly for their return. In that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had everything she needed right here: a loving partner, a beautiful daughter, and a sense of self that was finally truly complete. The journey had been long and painful, filled with unexpected twists and heart-wrenching revelations. But as Sarah stepped out of the car, ready to embrace her daughter and move forward into this new chapter of her life, she knew that every step had been worth it. She had found her truth, and in doing so had found herself. As Sarah and Michael settled into their new normal, life seemed to take on a rhythm of cautious optimism. The dust from the corruption scandal had begun to settle, and the city of Chicago was slowly healing. Sarah had regular meetings with Eliza, gradually building a relationship with her birth mother, while also maintaining the strong bonds with Linda and Frank, the parents who had raised her. However, just as they thought they had weathered the worst of the storm, a new challenge arose that would test the strength of their family unit once again. It started with a routine checkup for Michael. He had been experiencing persistent headaches, which he had initially attributed to stress from the recent upheavals in their lives, but when the doctor ordered an MRI as a precaution, none of them were prepared for the results. Sarah sat in the sterile hospital room, clutching Michael's hand as the neurologist delivered the news. "I'm afraid we found a mass in your brain, Mr. Anderson," the doctor said, his voice grave. "Given its location and size, we need to perform a biopsy as soon as possible to determine if it's malignant." The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Malignant. Cancer. Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath her feet. After everything they had been through, after finally finding a measure of peace and happiness, how could this be happening? Michael, ever the pillar of strength, squeezed Sarah's hand. "What are our options, doctor?" he asked, his voice steady despite the fear Sarah could see in his eyes. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of tests, consultations, and agonizing waiting. The biopsy confirmed their worst fears: the tumor was indeed malignant. The neurosurgeon laid out their options: aggressive surgery followed by chemotherapy and radiation, or a less invasive approach that would likely buy them more time but not offer a cure. As they grappled with this life-altering decision, Sarah and Michael faced another heart-wrenching challenge: how to tell Emma. Their daughter, perceptive beyond her years, had already sensed that something was wrong. One evening, after Emma was tucked into bed, Sarah broke down in Michael's arms. "How do we do this?" she sobbed. "How do we tell our little girl that her daddy might? That you might?" Michael held her close, his own tears falling silently. "We tell her the truth," he said softly, "as much as she can understand. We tell her that daddy is sick, but that we're all going to fight this together." The conversation with Emma was one of the hardest things Sarah had ever done. They sat their daughter down in the living room, surrounded by her favorite stuffed animals, and gently explained that daddy had a boo-boo in his brain that the doctors needed to fix. Emma's big blue eyes filled with tears. "But you're going to be okay, right, Daddy?" she asked, her voice small and frightened. Michael gathered Emma into his arms, holding her close. "I'm going to fight as hard as I can, sweetheart," he promised. "And I need you and Mommy to be my special helpers. Can you do that for me?" Emma nodded solemnly, wrapping her little arms around Michael's neck. "I'll be the best helper ever, Daddy. I promise." As they embarked on the grueling journey of Michael's treatment, Sarah found herself drawing on strengths she didn't know she possessed. She became the family's rock, juggling Emma's needs, Michael's care, and her own tumultuous emotions with a grace that amazed everyone around her. Eliza proved to be an unexpected source of support during this time. Having lost her own husband to cancer years earlier, she understood the roller coaster of emotions Sarah was experiencing. She often stepped in to watch Emma when Sarah needed to accompany Michael to his treatments or simply to give Sarah a much-needed break. One particularly difficult day, after a challenging round of chemotherapy had left Michael weak and nauseous, Sarah found herself sitting in the hospital corridor, feeling utterly overwhelmed. Eliza sat down beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I know it feels impossible right now," Eliza said softly, "but you're stronger than you know, Sarah. You've already overcome so much. You can get through this too." Sarah leaned into her birth mother's embrace, drawing comfort from the connection they had forged. "I'm so scared," she whispered. "I can't lose him, Mum. I can't." It was the first time Sarah had called Eliza Mum, and the significance of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. Eliza held Sarah tighter, her own eyes filling with tears. "We're all here for you, sweetheart. You're not alone in this fight." As the months of treatment wore on, there were good days and bad days. Days when Michael's spirits were high, when he could play with Emma and talk about the future with hope. And there were days when the pain and fatigue seemed insurmountable, when Sarah would lie beside him in the hospital bed, holding him as he wept from the sheer exhaustion of it all. Through it all, their love for each other only grew stronger. Sarah marveled at Michael's resilience, his determination to fight not just for himself but for her and Emma. And Michael found himself falling in love with Sarah all over again, amazed by her strength and unwavering support. It was during one of Michael's hospital stays that an unexpected twist occurred. Sarah was at his bedside, reading aloud from one of his favorite books, when a nurse came in to check his vitals. "Mr. Anderson," the nurse said, a puzzled look on her face. "Have you been experiencing any abdominal pain recently?" Michael frowned, shaking his head. "No, why do you ask?" The nurse hesitated, then said, "Your latest blood work shows some anomalies that aren't typically associated with your current treatment. With your permission, I'd like to consult with your oncologist about running some additional tests." Sarah and Michael exchanged worried glances. More tests. What could this mean? The next day they received news that would once again alter the course of their lives. The oncologist entered the room, a strange mix of concern and cautious optimism on his face. "Mr. Anderson, Mrs. Thompson." He began, "We've discovered something unexpected in Michael's latest tests. It appears that the anomalies in his blood work are indicative of a rare genetic condition. This condition, while serious in its own right, may actually be the key to treating his brain tumor more effectively." Sarah leaned forward, her heart racing. "What are you saying, doctor?" The oncologist explained that Michael's genetic condition made his body uniquely receptive to a new experimental treatment that had shown promising results in cases similar to his. It wasn't a guaranteed cure, but it offered a ray of hope they hadn't dared to imagine. As the doctor outlined the potential risks and benefits of this new treatment plan, Sarah felt a surge of emotions: fear, hope, disbelief, and above all, a fierce determination. She looked at Michael, seeing the same mix of feelings reflected in his eyes. "What do you think?" she asked softly, squeezing his hand. Michael took a deep breath, then nodded. "I think we have to try. For us, for Emma, for our future. We've come this far. We can't give up now." The decision to pursue this new treatment option marked the beginning of yet another challenging chapter in their journey. But as they faced this new hurdle together, Sarah and Michael found themselves stronger and more united than ever before. As they left the hospital that day, with a new treatment plan in hand and a glimmer of hope in their hearts, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the twists and turns their life had taken. From a chance encounter on a rainy night to battling corruption, uncovering family secrets, and now fighting for Michael's life, every step had led them here. She looked at Michael, saw the determination in his eyes, and knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Their love, tested by fire and strengthened by adversity, would carry them through this latest storm. And perhaps, just perhaps, they would emerge on the other side stronger and more united than ever before. The experimental treatment for Michael's condition proved to be a grueling journey, filled with ups and downs that tested the strength of their family unit. For months, their lives revolved around hospital visits, medication schedules, and the constant anxiety of waiting for test results. Through it all, Sarah remained a pillar of strength, balancing her roles as mother, caregiver, and partner with a grace that amazed everyone around her. Emma, wise beyond her years, became Michael's little nurse, always ready with a hug or a silly joke to lift his spirits on the toughest days. The bond between father and daughter grew stronger than ever, as Michael fought not just for himself, but for the chance to see his little girl grow up. As the treatment progressed, they began to see glimmers of hope. Michael's tumor showed signs of shrinking, and his energy levels slowly improved. Each small victory was celebrated by their growing support network: Linda and Frank, Eliza, James, and the many friends they had made throughout their journey. It was during one of Michael's better weeks that Sarah received an unexpected call from Rebecca Lawson at the Chicago Tribune. The expose on the corruption scandal had sparked a nationwide conversation about government transparency and accountability. Now, a year after the initial story broke, Rebecca wanted to do a follow-up piece on how the scandal had affected the lives of those involved. Sarah hesitated, unsure if she was ready to revisit that tumultuous time in their lives. But after discussing it with Michael, they decided that sharing their story might offer hope to others facing seemingly insurmountable challenges. The day of the interview, Sarah sat in their living room, Michael by her side, as Rebecca asked them to reflect on the past year. As they spoke about the corruption case, Sarah's discovery of her birth parents, and Michael's health battle, Sarah was struck by how far they had come. "You've been through so much," Rebecca said, her voice filled with admiration. "How do you find the strength to keep going?" Sarah glanced at Michael, squeezing his hand. "Love," she said simply. "Love for each other, for Emma, for the life we're building together. When you have that, you can face anything." Michael nodded, adding, "and community. We couldn't have made it this far without the support of our family and friends. It's taught us the true meaning of resilience." As Rebecca wrapped up the interview, she had one final question. "After everything you've been through, what's next for your family?" Sarah and Michael exchanged a look, a silent conversation passing between them. It was time to share the news they'd been holding close to their hearts. "Actually," Sarah said, a smile spreading across her face, "we have some exciting news. Despite all the odds, despite being told it was nearly impossible given Michael's condition and treatment, we're expecting a baby." Rebecca's eyes widened in surprise and joy. "That's incredible. Congratulations." The news of Sarah's pregnancy had been a shock to everyone, not least to Sarah and Michael themselves. Given the stress on Michael's body from the treatment, doctors had warned them that conceiving would be highly unlikely. Yet here they were, expecting a miracle. As the news spread among their friends and family, there was a sense of renewed hope and joy. Emma was ecstatic at the prospect of becoming a big sister, already making plans for how she would help take care of the baby. The pregnancy, however, was not without its complications. Sarah's age and the stress of the past year made it high risk, requiring frequent checkups and careful monitoring. But Sarah faced each challenge with the same determination she had shown throughout their ordeal. As Sarah's belly grew, so did Michael's strength. Whether it was the treatment, the power of positive thinking, or a combination of both, his condition continued to improve. By the time Sarah entered her third trimester, Michael was well enough to return to work part-time, focusing on pro bono cases that aligned with their newfound passion for social justice. The day Sarah went into labor was a whirlwind of excitement and nervous energy. Michael, despite his own health concerns, was a rock throughout the delivery, holding Sarah's hand and offering words of encouragement as she brought their second child into the world. As the first cry of their newborn son filled the delivery room, Sarah and Michael shared a look of pure joy and amazement. They had done it. Against all odds, they had created this new life, a symbol of their love and resilience. They named him Benjamin, meaning "son of my right hand," a testament to the strength and support they had found in each other throughout their journey. The days and weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and moments of indescribable happiness. Emma took to her role as big sister with enthusiasm, always eager to help with Benjamin and shower him with love. As they settled into life as a family of four, Sarah and Michael found themselves reflecting on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. From their chance encounter on that rainy night to the battles they had fought against corruption, against illness, against their own doubts and fears, every step had led them here to this moment of profound joy and gratitude. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new home, a modest but comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, Sarah turned to Michael, Benjamin sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "what would have happened if you hadn't stopped to help Emma and me that night?" Michael smiled, reaching out to stroke Benjamin's cheek. "Sometimes. But then I look at our family, at the life we've built together, and I know that this was always meant to be our path. Every challenge, every struggle, it all led us here." Sarah nodded, leaning into Michael's embrace. "We've come so far," she mused. "From homelessness to this. From strangers to soulmates. It's like a story too incredible to be true," Michael finished for her, a twinkle in his eye. Sarah laughed softly, careful not to wake Benjamin. "Exactly. If someone wrote our story, no one would believe it." As if on cue, Emma came bounding out onto the porch, her latest drawing in hand. "Mummy, Daddy, look, I drew our family." Sarah and Michael examined the colorful crayon drawing stick figures representing each of them, including baby Benjamin, all holding hands with big smiles on their faces. Above them, Emma had written in her best handwriting, "My family, the bravest heroes I know." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she hugged Emma close. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. And you're right, we are heroes. Not because we're special or powerful, but because we love each other and never give up." As the sun set on another day, casting a warm glow over their little family, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its own challenges. Michael's health would always be a concern, and raising two children while building their careers would be no easy task. But Sarah knew that whatever came their way, they would face it together. Their love, tested by fire and strengthened by adversity, had proven itself unbreakable. And in that love they had found a power greater than any force that had tried to tear them apart. As Benjamin stirred in her arms and Emma snuggled between her and Michael, Sarah looked out at the future stretching before them. It was a future bright with promise, rich with love, and filled with the endless possibilities that come from never giving up hope. Their story, improbable as it might seem, was far from over. In fact, Sarah realized it was just beginning, and she couldn't wait to see what the next chapter would bring. In the darkest moments of our lives, when hope seems lost and pain overwhelms us, remember Sarah and Michael's journey. Their story reminds us that even in our deepest despair, we are never truly alone. God's love surrounds us even when we can't feel it. Life may test you beyond what you think you can bear. You may face challenges that seem insurmountable, feel pain that seems unbearable. But in those moments, remember that you are stronger than you know. Like Sarah, fighting for her life, or Michael, praying by her bedside, you have an inner strength that can overcome any obstacle. Faith isn't about never doubting or fearing. It's about finding the courage to keep going, to keep believing, even when the path ahead seems dark. It's about trusting that there is a greater plan, even when we can't see it. In your moments of weakness, when you feel you can't go on, think of Sarah clinging to life, of Michael's unwavering love and faith. Let their strength inspire you to take one more step, to say one more prayer, to hold on for one more day. Remember that miracles happen every day. They're not always grand gestures, but often small moments of grace, a hand to hold, a prayer answered, a life saved against all odds. Open your heart to these miracles, big and small. To those feeling lost, broken, or abandoned, you are loved more than you can imagine. By your family, by your friends, and by a God who knows every hair on your head. Your pain is seen, your struggles acknowledged, your tears counted. You are never alone in your suffering. Life is precious, fragile, and often painfully short. Don't wait to tell your loved ones how much they mean to you. Don't hesitate to offer forgiveness, to ask for help, to extend a hand to someone in need. Each day is a gift, an opportunity to love more deeply, to live more fully. In your darkest hour, when hope seems lost, remember that dawn always follows the night. Hold onto your faith, lean on your loved ones, and trust that you are being carried even when you can't walk on your own. You are stronger than you know, more loved than you can imagine, and capable of miracles. Believe in yourself, in the power of love, and in the endless grace of God. Your story, like Sarah and Michael's, is still being written. Make it a testament to the enduring power of faith, hope, and love. Dear viewers, if Sarah and Michael's incredible journey has touched your heart, we invite you to be part of our storytelling community. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue bringing these powerful narratives to life. If you've been moved by this story, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It's your way of saying you want to be there for the next chapter, the next emotional roller coaster, the next tale of triumph over adversity. Did this video resonate with you? Give it a thumbs up. Your likes not only boost our morale but also help others discover this story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of Sarah and Michael's story touched you the most? What themes would you like to explore in future videos? Share your reflections in the comments below. Your insights fuel our creativity and help us craft even more compelling narratives. Excited for part 2? Let us know in the comments. Your enthusiasm is our motivation. We pour our hearts into these stories, and knowing you're eager for more gives us the drive to keep creating. Lastly, if you believe this story deserves to be heard by others, please share it. Every share spreads a message of hope, resilience, and the power of love. Remember, your engagement isn't just about numbers for us. It's about building a community of storytellers and story lovers, all coming together to celebrate the incredible journeys of the human spirit. Thank you for being part of our storytelling family. Together, let's continue to inspire, to move, and to remind each other of the beauty and strength within us all.